It woke her at 2:47 a.m., not with panic, not with pain, but with a cramp so familiar it felt like an old conversation she had once promised to finish. She reached for the glass of water on the nightstand, the one she had poured 6 hours earlier. The ice was gone, the water still, and the body calling. It woke her at 2:47 a.m., not with panic, not with pain, but with a cramp so familiar it felt like an old conversation she had once promised to finish. She reached for the glass of water on the nightstand, the one she had poured 6 hours earlier. The ice was gone, the water still, and the body calling. 1. The cramp that wasn't just a cramp. It came at night, a sharp curl in the calf, the kind that startles you before thought can form. She winced, pressed her heel down hard, reached for the blanket as if pressure alone could soothe something deeper. It wasn't the first time, but this one felt louder, not in pain, but in presence. She told herself it was just a cramp, too much salt, not enough stretching, old muscles. But her body wasn't just seizing, it was signaling. Scientists call it a magnesium dip. After 60, the body loses its reserves quietly, especially at night when the nervous system should be resting, but instead misfires. The brain slows, the thalamus filters less. Messages from muscle to mind get delayed, and what should be a whisper arrives as a lightning bolt. But what if that pain wasn't failure? What if it was memory? Because that part of her leg, the one that curled so tightly, was the same muscle she used to rock the cradle back and forth for hours decades ago. What if the body was just trying to keep the rhythm of something she hadn't let herself feel in years? This wasn't injury, it was interruption. The body's way of saying, "You left me behind somewhere, and I miss you." It wasn't dirty, it wasn't broken, it was neglected. And now, in the silence of early morning, it had finally gathered enough courage to speak. 2. The archaeology of motion. She tried to walk it off. That was the instinct. Keep moving, shake it out, distract the muscle before the memory had time to arrive. But her ankle disagreed. It stiffened like something ancient, not broken, but brittle from being ignored too long. Each step across the tile felt uneven, as if the floor beneath her had changed shape in the night. She reached the sink, held on, not for support, but for bearing witness. And there, in the mirror above the faucet, she saw someone familiar, not tired, not weak, just paused, as if the version of her that used to move through the world had slipped into a still frame that hadn't yet caught up with the present. The ache in her leg didn't retreat. It deepened, but not painfully. More like pressure from a drawer she hadn't opened in years. A cramp, yes, but also the garden bed she hadn't knelt into since the year after he died. The path by the lake where her hands once guided a tiny bicycle seat. The stairs she climbed barefoot to hush a child's nightmare before her own heart had even slowed down. This wasn't just motion, it was excavation. Her body was digging gently, urgently through the layers of neglect, retrieving traces of purpose she'd long since assumed were folded away. It wasn't injury, it was a kind of remembering, a language older than explanation, written in tendon and breath. And now, as she stood in the faint morning light, her ankles still tight, her reflection still holding her gaze, she realized this wasn't about walking it off. It was about walking it back, into the places where she'd once mattered with her whole body. 3. Threshold of thirst. She didn't reach for the water immediately. She just looked at it, the glass on the nightstand, still and silent, catching a sliver of moonlight through the half-closed curtain. There was dust on the rim, just a little, proof that even rituals grow tired when we stop meeting them halfway. She had placed it there before sleep, not out of habit, but out of hope. A quiet preparation, just in case the night asked more of her than rest. And now, in the hush between cramp and calm, her body asked back. She lifted the glass slowly, felt its coolness against her palm, a temperature she didn't expect but somehow needed. The first sip wasn't for her throat. It was for her memory, for the mornings when she used to rise early to boil water for someone else, for the years when she drank last because everyone else drank first. The water met her mouth, then her spine, then the spaces in her legs that had felt unreachable just minutes before. This wasn't hydration, it was a welcome, a return. Each swallow said, "I'm still listening. You're still mine. We've still got time." She didn't rush. She didn't drain the glass. She left a little, a small, unfinished offering to the self that had the wisdom to prepare for this moment before she knew she'd need it. In that quiet act, there was no transformation, no miracle, just a shift from neglect to attention. And it was enough. The thirst had never been just physical. It had been waiting in her like a forgotten room whose light she finally turned back on. 4. What Dr. Rios hears in their silence. Dr. Amina Rios doesn't just treat symptoms. She listens to the spaces between them. As a geriatric neurologist, she's learned that aging doesn't always speak in words. Sometimes it speaks in pauses. In the shrug that follows, "It's nothing." In the tight smile that hides, "It's just part of getting older." But she hears more than that. She once sat beside a man in his 70s who had come in for what he called a minor foot twitch. He joked, laughed off the limp, said, "It's probably just me being lazy." But when she gently asked how long he'd stopped dancing with his wife at Sunday Mass, his eyes welled. "Since the cramp got worse," he said. "I didn't want to embarrass her." Dr. Rios calls them porch-light nerves, still wired, still glowing, but flickering, dimming from years of slow, silent neglect. She explains it softly. Our bodies lose electrolytes over time, magnesium, potassium, sodium, the minerals that once lit us up. Without them, our signals get weaker, movement stutters, confidence shrinks, and silence grows. But the silence isn't strength, it's fatigue, the kind that builds when no one asks what the ache might be carrying. She teaches families to listen for what's not said, the way someone rubs the same spot on their ankle but never mentions it, the way they shift in their seat when certain topics arrive. Neglect doesn't always come as absence. Sometimes it hides in politeness, in deflection, in laughter that covers the ache of losing not ability, but agency. And so when an elder says, "It's just a cramp," Dr. Rios hears something else entirely. "I miss the body that listened back." It wasn't a breakdown, it was a signal, a pulse, a knock at the door from a body that had waited too long without being heard. That cramp in her leg, that ache behind her knee, they weren't betrayals, they were invitations, a kind of remembering written intention. She had assumed it was just aging, the inevitable unraveling, the slow erasure of youth. But now, with her hand pressed gently to that spot, she understood. This wasn't collapse. This was communication. A body doesn't scream when it trusts you, it whispers. It repeats itself only when it feels forgotten. What she once dismissed as tight muscles, old joints, not enough water, was really the voice of a body that had carried her without question, and now simply wanted to be noticed before it had to shout. The realization didn't rush in, it settled, like warmth in the soles of her feet after the first sip of morning water, like breath that fills the lungs without needing to prove anything. She had thought the pain meant she was fading, but the pain meant she was still here, not broken, not unclean, just neglected, and now finally recognized. And that was enough to begin again. The muscle didn't vanish, it softened. The pain didn't end, it exhaled. She set the empty glass back on the nightstand, then pulled the blanket over her legs, not to sleep, but to witness what had just returned. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't clarity. It was something quieter, a kind of recognition. The body hadn't betrayed her. It had simply grown tired of not being noticed. And now, after one sip, one breath, one small act of presence, she could feel it again, waiting, listening, not for rescue, but for rhythm. As she lay back, her foot flexed once more, this time not in protest, but in release. The house around her was silent, but inside her something had shifted. What had once been dismissed as nuisance, as noise, as the inconvenience of age, now felt like language finally translated. She wasn't breaking, she was being asked to return to the places she had forgotten to stay. And as her eyes closed, not in sleep, but in softness, the only sound left was the body, breathing gratitude for being heard again. If something in your body ever asked for your attention without using words, a cramp that lingered, a twinge that felt familiar, a silence that arrived through pain, you're not alone. Sometimes the body speaks softly because it still trusts you'll listen. And if reading this brought a memory, or a place on your skin, or a moment in time that suddenly felt alive again, you can leave it below. Just a word, a whisper, a mark that says, "I heard it this time." We'll hold it with you gently in the quiet where healing always begins.